discourse, and this is a continuation of the discourse on resilience. We've had a couple of discourses from Reverend Daniel and Reverend Lotus on resilience, and I wanted to share a different type of resilience. Resilience, if you look it up, has several different definitions. One of them is basically getting back up no matter what the circumstance, no matter what happens to you. Another type of resilience is flexibility or elasticity. And it's this second definition that I want to focus on during today's discourse. So resilience being flexibility. As many of you know, water is one of the most flexible substances known to man. And during today's discourse, I'll be analogizing resilience with water a lot. Many, many different mystical texts refer to God as water. The fountain of everlasting life, the fountain of the living being. And why do these great mystics keep referring to God as water? I would postulate that it has a lot to do with the flexibility of water. Water is one of the few substances, as many of you know, that it comes in three different forms. There's water as liquid, there's water as solid, and there's water as gas. And you can think of this water being in these three different forms as the Trinity of the Godhead. We know that water can be calm. It can be like a tranquil pond. Water can be devastating in terms of its destruction, like a tsunami or a hurricane. Water can be impenetrable, like glaciers, and it can be formless and amorphous and unseen, like a gas. So as we go through today's homily and you think about resilience, come back to this concept of water, and water being this resilient force that can take the shape and the form of anything and can fit into any circumstance and really has all possibility within it. I wanted to share a quote. I was originally going to share a quote from one of my favorite texts, which is the Tao Te Ching, but I found one that I liked a little bit better by a martial artist who many of you know as Bruce Lee, and he talks about water a lot. So I wrote down this quote from Bruce Lee. He says, "Empty your mind and be formless and shapeless, like water. Now you put water in a cup, and it becomes the cup. You put water in a bottle, and it becomes the bottle. You put water in a teapot, and it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crush. Be like water." So of course, Bruce Lee was talking about water in terms of martial arts and how it is beneficial to have this formless, all possibility nature as a martial artist. So you're able to meet every circumstance that presents itself to you, no matter what it is. In the quote, he starts off with emptying the mind. When your mind is empty, it is at its most resilient. When your mind is empty, you are not bound to judgments, conclusions, or preconceived ideas of what should be. When your mind is full of these judgments, of these conclusions, of these preconceived notions, it is stiff like a stick. It is easy to break. It is not flexible, and it is not resilient. Your mind can be attached to all kinds of different things, and we've talked about this a lot at the Spirit of Lotus during different discourses. This attachment of the mind to the past, for instance, to people, places, and things, even if they're in the present, or to the future, fear about what's going to happen in the future, that's an attachment. Unease about what's going to happen in the future, that's attachment. All of these different attachments of the mind, they're like a glue that prevent you from moving. And when you're stuck in these attachments, you cannot be resilient. You cannot face different challenges and different obstacles with creativity and all possibility. That's what resilience really is. It's this ability not only to get up and to continue on, but to be flexible in every circumstance that presents itself to you, so you can be creative and find a solution, so that you can tap into your all possibility. I mentioned during the prayer before the discourse that you come to God as an empty cup. And you come to God as this empty cup to free yourself from these judgments and conclusions and attachments and preconceived notions. It's when you're an empty cup that you have the flexibility to be filled with God's will, so that He can direct you in thought, word, and deed. Think about that. That is true resilience. Going back to the water analogy, when a lot of these mystical texts talk about God, they talk about this flow, this everlasting flow, which does not have a beginning and does not have an end, like this endless river that we talk about at the end of our meditation, this infinite river. If you're not resilient, what you're really doing is going against the flow, going against the current. And that causes suffering. We know this from the Buddhic teachings, but really from teachings of all different kinds of religious traditions. A lot of people have this misconception that if you go with the flow, if you accept things as they are instead of trying to change them, then you cannot be a force for change. I would disagree with that opinion, however. When we talk about going with the flow of life, going with the flow of nature, and being resilient and flexible in this, it doesn't mean that you cannot be a force for change. What it means is that you have to be a force for change within the natural flow of things. So let me try to explain that a little bit more if I can. You can float down a river going with the current in a raft. But you don't have to stay on the raft. You can change the mode in which you're going down the river. You can go down the river in a canoe. You can go down a river in a powerboat. You can go down the river in a paddle boat or a houseboat. You can change the mode in which you are going with the flow. And by changing the mode in which you're going with the flow, instead of fighting against the moving current of the river, you can be a force for change in life and on that river. The antithesis of resilience is, instead of being like a canoe or a raft or whatever your mode of traveling is, going with the flow, you're trying to stop the flow of the river. You're trying to be more like a dam. And so if you are this dam, if you are not being resilient and flexible, there's the force of the dam that is constantly meeting the force of the river. And in the end, over time, the river will break the dam. Any dam. It's just a matter of time. We know that this flexibility of water, it is such a powerful force. We've talked about how you can take a rock, and with water, you can just take a drip of water, and over time, as you drip that water onto the rock, over and over and over again, you'll eventually create a hole through that rock. And again, this hole is being created by something that this water is essentially formless, will take the shape of anything. It is flexible. It is resilient. If you dam up a river, the water will not only put force directly against the dam to try to break through it, but it will go around the dam. It'll flood over the dam. If it's cold enough in the area where the dam is, the river will freeze and crack the dam. It's this resilience, this flexibility to overcome the obstacle. If we are truly resilient, this is the path to enlightenment. We have to free our minds from bondage, free our hearts from bondage, free our souls from bondage. Instead of having there's nothing wrong with plans, by the way. You can have a plan for a business, you can have a life plan, you can have a plan for anything really, marriage, romance. There's nothing wrong with plans. There's nothing wrong with writing them down and doing our best to follow them. But if you are rigid in your plan, then they can be broken. It's like a stick that's been baked in the sun. It's easy to break. Versus a stick that is waterlogged. It bends. So if you have a plan, again, nothing wrong with it. But the key is to be resilient with the plan. And again, by resilient, I mean flexible. If things come up, which means that the plan has to be altered, then we can do that. We do our practices as spiritual people, and we do them to the best of our ability, but there may be times that we have to alter or modify or be flexible with our practices. And a lot of times we need instruction and guidance from a teacher to help us with that. We've all seen how being inflexible, it doesn't matter if, take politics for instance, it doesn't matter if you're far left or far right. Can you see how they're really very much the same? They're both very inflexible, not resilient, not open-minded, not coming to God as an empty cup. So for the rest of this week, I would encourage everybody to think about resilience as being flexible, um, as coming to God as an empty cup, opening space in your heart, opening space in your soul, opening space in your mind, to appreciate whatever comes in and to move along with it as the river of life. And now we have time for a deep level meditation.